This is chapter 12, integrating CI with Argo CD. Um, and I think this is also something that you put here in the reconciliation response time. I think this is when we talk about, I think we're going to talk about the solution, but the reconciliation response time, Christian, what's this like magic 3 minute that people keep talking about?
Yeah, and to answer that, actually, you have to kind of go back a little bit, and I think going back meaning like I think either last week or the week before, you mentioned someone like posted something on LinkedIn saying CI or CD.
CI and CD is just not a word. Like,
Yeah, it's not a word. And actually, in the context of like Kubernetes, in the context of GitOps, I think I actually absolutely agree with that. We've always lumped it together, CI and CD, like, and we think of it as a single process, and it's not a single process. There are actually two distinct processes with two distinct end goals, right? And it's just because of just like the way we used to do things, and it's like there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like, it just the way we used to do things is like, and things, platforms like CloudBees and Jenkins and stuff like that, like they meshed it together, right? They gave you a platform that you did both processes all at the same time. So, but
because you want to release software, right? And I want to
yeah,
throw the from
yeah,
the accelerate book, right?
yeah. I
You're
want to.
releasing software, so there's also continuous release.
Yeah, exactly. So, and but in when you're talking about like GitOps and like Kubernetes specifically, right? Because you're thinking about like Kubernetes and GitOps in general, but just because it's Kubernetes, so if we're just sticking with Kubernetes, it's an asynchronous process, right? So like there's stuff that's happening, and it doesn't really necessarily let you know that that's happening, right? Like if
Promise theory, like
yeah,
Kelsey
yeah,
used to call it, like this is a promise
it's a promise
promise
theory. Yeah,
theory,
yeah.
right?
Like Kubernetes will eventually
I
make
want I
yeah,
want a pod running this container. Go, like
and go
eventually somebody
and
would get
yeah,
me
and
that.
eventually, yeah, exactly. Eventually, that pod will be there. As a promise theory, right? And so, and that's kind of where the aspect of like you said the magic 3 minutes, right? Like at um every three. This is by default, right? You can configure this, but it by every 3 minutes, Argo will check to see if it needs to make a change to the system, right? It'll check your Git repo or your Helm repo, right? But let's just make it simple. It'll check your Git repo, and it will see if there's a change, and if there's a change, it'll apply that change, right? Well, sometimes you want that change to happen immediately, right? And I think this is kind of where like, okay, well, like where does that fit in? Where does CI fit in with how you're gonna do CD with Kubernetes and Argo CD, right? Because like basically with Argo CD, you're replacing kind of your current CD process, right? And you're kind of pushing it like to do like the last mile, right? So you're actually asking a lot of CI when you're kind of implementing this, and you're really kind of separating kind of like the synchronous process of CI and the asynchronous process of Argo CD and Kubernetes, right? And so that's kind of like what in that section about like the 3 second thing, right? It's kind of like it'll just kind of constantly every 3 seconds, sorry, every 3 minutes, it'll check to see if there's a change, and it'll act upon that change if it's there, right? And so I always give the thermostat kind of analogy, right? I set the thermostat to like, I'll keep it international. I'll set it to 20 degrees, right, Celsius, in my thermostat, and the thermostat will turn the air off and on like as it needs it, but it isn't it doesn't do it immediately, right? Like there's like a control loop, right? Like there's like a loop that happens. It'll check to see, oh no, there's no change. Oh no, there's no change. Oh, there's a change. Let me act upon it.
Yeah, I think it's I think now that I think about it, it's one of the first times I've seen that simple definition that
Yeah.
CI is synchronous.
Yep.
Like you don't know much about what we're talking about. Like CI, we're talking about synchronous process, which is sequential things, which is like you do A, when A is done, you do B, when B is done, you do C, when C is done, you start E, F, and G in parallel, and then when all three are done, you start K, right? It's sequence, and you're controlling what things are happening, so it's synchronous. And CD is asynchronous. Maybe my theory is that remember the date, the last date that there was no Argo CD and Flux didn't exist. GitOps didn't exist and Kubernetes exists. There was a time period that Kubernetes existed and you would release software through a Jenkins, a CI to Kubernetes, and there was no GitOps involved. And that was a continuous deployment process or a release software that is like, yeah, I build my artifact, my code, instead of creating a jar file or war file, you create an image, which at the end is just all of them are like a tar.gz, and then you run kubectl apply. Then maybe this was before Helm, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a kube control. Was kube control? I don't. I remember the 1.0 was not kubectl. It was kube control. I think it was kube control CLI. It was called kube control CLI. Um, and then you did an apply, and then
Yeah.
you did a rollout status, rollout like
Status.
things when
Yeah.
deployments came after, and it was an imperative synchronous task of like I build the software and then
Yeah.
I Kubernetes apply and this, and then this CLI is waiting until etcd has the information, and the CLI is also smart enough that it can also check this reconciler inside Kubernetes to the point that the pod says that it's ready or the deployment says it's ready, and then
Mhm.
give you back the feedback saying the software is released. So this was one thing. It was you went doing the continuous integration and the deployment in one step before GitOps existed. I mean that's why maybe
Yep.
the
Yep.
arguments about like it's not CI, it's CI/CD because asynchronous CD came when GitOps got created or invented. The word by Rich
Yeah.
Wright got created.
Yeah, it's kind of like we kind of bolted, like you said, we kind of bolted on kind of Kubernetes, but like we kept like the same process,
Yeah.
right? Like we're like, okay, so like instead of doing, like you said, a war file or a jar file or whatever, and instead of like FTPing into a VM and waiting for Java to start, like now it's like kubectl, like you said, kubectl apply, kubectl wait, rollout wait, you, and then like you, yeah, I don't say artificially, but we artificially like put in blocking operations, right? Because
Yep.
like we had that mentality. We still have that mentality, right? Like of CI and CD being like kind of one process.
Yep. And so that's why we need this reconciliation time, right? Of like, because when you have a controller inside Kubernetes, that controller and people, I think we have done sessions here on like how to write. One of the first sessions that we did was, and you can look it up in YouTube, like creating a Go controller, right? Like with Cube Builder, and
Yeah,
basically showing people like a Kubernetes.
that was a
You
cool
can,
one, by the way.
it's
That was
a, sorry?
that was a cool one. I like that. Oh, I like that one.
It did Cube Builder and basically was
Yeah,
a controller that was reactive based on etcd changes. So the etcd hosts both things. He hosts the spec and the status. So an
mhm,
etcd, your controller is always watching through an informer, and it's a reactive thing. The informer is a piece of code that would tell you something changing the spec, and then you do work, or the status change, and then you do work. So you're monitoring that etcd, but then now you
yeah,
install Argo CD that is monitoring something external, Git, right? That is when the spec changes in Git, I need to
yeah.
do something. So it's no longer SCD. So
It's
Argo
no
CD
longer. Yep.
becomes man in the middle, right? Watching Git for that spec change, and then pushing it into etcd to apply that spec. But the cool thing about Argo CD also do health um, healing, or
Yeah,
like if something's changing in etcd, it will also react Argo CD saying, what happened here? Does it still matches the stuff
yep,
that I applied a minute ago or not? And or this extra thing got added, like it should be removed. So that's also, not a lot of people talk about that second like reactive thing that etcd
yeah,
is Argo CD is monitoring etcd, don't just monitoring Git. But this reconciling thing is like, well, we how often does Argo CD goes into Git and check if there's anything new, right? And the default is the 3 minute for that, and that's will be the Argo CD repo server, right? This is the value for the repo server. Nothing to do with the other
Yeah, correct.
controllers.
Yeah, this is for the repo server. So this is kind of like the timeout where it'll check the source of truth, right? Which whatever it is.
And then you also put something here for production, you or Andy, right? Put something say like the default is 3 minutes, but take
Yeah.
into account if you have a lot of apps, the control is busy, right? Checking Git that often. If you
Yeah.
make that 1 second or 30 second, I have put it in 30 seconds or 10 seconds, but it was just for demo or workshop purposes. I always
Yeah.
tell you like it's just like because we don't have a maybe you don't have a way of creating a webhook. We talk about that to make it go faster. But if you make it go faster, you will have a lot of the controller will have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Or you would hit Git and then you get rate limited. Some Git providers and vendors have rate limiting, right?
Oh yeah. And
Um,
I've worked, and I think because like you can like you can tune Argo CD to,
I
and
think
I
it
think
was
it does.
5,000 per minute, 5,000 requests per minute,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
That you
like
hit it
like
very fast if you have a thousand
yeah.
Argo apps.
Yeah, well and also like you actually hit the rate limit before like you would hit it's surprising before you hit any um like any production sort of issues, right? Like or like any slowdowns or anything like that. You actually hit the rate limit because I've run into that with some customers I worked with is like they would hit the rate limit before any sort of like resource contention or anything like that, which is interesting. So but yeah, like you would definitely need to take stuff like that into account, right? It's 3 minutes. um I if anything, like in a production, I would set it to like five actually. Like I would actually be a little bit more conservative.
But then yeah, in production, because I think a lot of people and the 3 minutes is okay if you like just install it in kind, right? And you're just experimenting on the
Yeah.
PLC or you're evaluating the company. A lot of people are just don't use GitOps. Like if you are
Yeah.
thinking that everyone in the world uses GitOps, and have news for you. Like majority of people they have aspirations to use GitOps, but they don't know how to, or they don't have the bandwidth, or it's a lower priority, or they think it's complex and such. But yeah, this thing also affects. I have a blog post that I did with Andrew, part of the Argo scalability, that if you make this reconciliation very short, it will trash the work that is going happening that is applying. So you have to have enough. Um, Time window for that sync for not trashing the information that you're going to sync. So reconciling too fast is also a problem.
Mhm.
But the most effective way is instead of like making Argo CD go, can it be turned off if you put a negative number? Now that I think about it,
Yeah, yeah. Anything zero, basically zero and
zero
below.
or
Yeah,
negative
zero.
one.
Well, zero will turn it off. Yeah. I
And
mean,
some
if
people
negative
may
one will also turn it off. So
and some people would just turn it off. Like I don't want to sync unless there's something in Git, and the way that I get notified is Git is like webhooks, right? Is that you introduced here?
yeah, yeah. So like webhooks is so like really uh the kind of recommendation that most people do in terms of production is like either they leave the reconciliation time alone or they actually make it actually really long. You know, like you said, like when you're doing demos and when you're playing it around, you want it relatively short, right? Like you want it short, that's fine, whatever, right? But actually, like in production, you maybe want to set it to like 5 minutes or even 10 minutes, and then set up webhooks for kind of like the on-demand kind of like if you make a change, you don't want to wait 10 minutes or 15 minutes or however long you set the reconciliation time. You want it as soon as you want the get commit. And that's what the webhooks come into play, right? Like that's the kind of like best of both worlds, right? Like you have like the control kind of loop, reconciliation loop aspect of GitOps, but you also have the event based mechanism in order to do things when an event happens, right? So you kind of get like best of both worlds there.
And Matt put something in the chat. He's saying that the CI/CD one step also reminds me of a simple pipeline started to put together like a GitHub action workflow. Open PRB merge that run tests, build an image, run scripts
Yeah.
to apply. So this is also important to mention here. I think we're going to see it is like maybe there's environments like you have different environments. You have staging, production, like companies have multiple environments. Maybe the production one you never have webhook configured because you are doing a promotion base. So something like Tekton or Argo, GitHub Actions, or Cargo were actually promoted by saying Argo Sync, right? Or Argo CLI Sync. And that's the moment that I want my software to be delivered. So I
Yeah.
don't want anyone like triggering my things from Git, or somebody merges the wrong thing, or
Hmm.
PR gets merged on Monday and we always ship on Tuesdays, right? So in production environments, like people can turn off webhooks and like make the reconciliation off because they're relying on promotion based or progressive promotion based things, like where even Argo
Hmm.
rollouts. I have customers that are like, we're building solutions that we have Argo rollouts on every cluster or every environment, and then Argo CD is syncing the configuration of that Argo rollouts, and then we do a progressive deployment that we're going to do a rollout and on cluster B, and then cluster C is a different
Yeah.
region. So Argo CD is there to do the sync, right, or put the desired state, and we watch for that thing to go healthy, which I think you have, at some point you have an example here. But what for the webhook? What are the problems that you can have in a webhook if you have like massive events coming in? I think you mentioned it here.
Yeah, yeah. You could, it's basically, there's a potential for like a DDoS attack, right? Like especially if you don't protect the Argo CD endpoint very well. Meaning like if it's public, you can technically hit the webhook like
Yeah,
already, right? Like it's listening for JSON payload.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so like it's like one of those things, right? Like it's just be
It's
careful when you're setting up webhooks and when you're turning it on.
it's
Um,
processing that HTTP request, opening it up and seeing and checking the secret. So
yeah,
it's actually
yeah,
doing work. It's consuming
yeah, yeah,
CPU and memory.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's actually doing
so I
work. So
think it was is it Expedia that gave a talk in ArgoCon saying, and other customers told me that why they do is they send the webhook to a proxy like Envoy,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they don't want to lose any of those webhooks. And when there's massive amounts of webhooks coming in, the repo server may just like crash and restart, or cannot handle all of them.
yeah, or like some sort of queuing mechanism, right? Like
Queuing
some sort of,
mechanism.
yeah,
So they do an Envoy queuing, and then they will like, yeah, wait for a certain amount, rate limiting,
yeah,
or even you can do a 429 back, and then to the kit the one who's
yeah,
sending it can like throttle back, fall back. So that's kind of an advanced solution. If you're having problems with webhook, don't give up. Like Kubernetes and people in DevOps, like that's our job, right? To find solutions. Just put
yeah.
an Envoy proxy, and you have it fixed there to handle the webhook. And the webhook is send. Remind me again. Does it get sent to the repo server, but the entry point is the Argo server API
It's the API is the first
hub?
yeah, first hop, and then there it'll actually trigger the repo server.
Okay. For the longest time, I thought it was the Argo CD server,
Yeah,
and I
no,
thought and I
no,
told people, like, somebody told me like, that's the hub. Like it eventually goes to the repo server. So if
the
you
repo
have
server. Yeah,
things like network policies that are preventing things, right, of connecting this Argo CD
yeah,
components, something that you need to take into account when you deploy Argo CD in production, have network policies that nothing should in the cluster should talk to Argo CD, right? You don't want some external like
yeah,
pod sitting in some hello world thing hitting or snooping or trying to DDoS your thing. So you have to network policy like only the Argo CD server needs to talk to the repo server.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I had that situation with one of my customers, and then we solved it by creating network policies, and also protecting um, this important thing called Redis. We have
yeah,
Redis. It has a bunch
yeah,
of data in
yeah,
there, and nobody's protecting it. So you can just go to Redis and read all the information about everything that you put in Git. And if you put secrets in Git, guess what? You're going to read from
yeah, yeah.
Redis.
The network policies are very, very, very important for sure, especially for things like that.
Um, so yeah, this is how you configure it. The webhook, that's will wake up the repo server. The repo server will um, have the new YAML files that then the Argo CD controller will get, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Basically, like in case anyone, it receives a JSON payload from like your Git provider, and what Argo CD does is it looks at the repo URL and matches it against the repo URL that it's using as a source of truth, and basically just does a sync there. So that's how it knows how to sync the repositories. It basically just doesn't say, oh, it came from this repo, so I'm gonna sync this repo internally, right? Like it doesn't really use much other many other data other than that, right?
And,
Like it
and
just
it respects the notation that is the path, right? When you have mono repos are huge, the payload will come with the path, and the path will match the annotation that you have in the Argo CD
yeah
app. In a
yeah
sense, like my
at that point it's
application
just
and not the whole
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. At that point, it's just Argo CD at the end, right? Like it kind of just says it goes through that same flow. So it's basically the same flow, whether like you click sync, whether you do Argo app sync or you use a webhook, it goes through that same flow. So it's the behavior is the same.
Great. And on OCI, right?
Yeah,
If you do
yeah,
an OCI, the repo. So what happens with OCI? Does
yeah,
the repo server goes X amount of time and checks that OCI image for new tags and things like that, or
yeah. With
image
OCI,
updater needs to be still used?
probably something that'll trigger that webhook or something, because like in OCI there's like no way to from OCI to set, unless, well actually unless you use something like because I know well, I'll say Quay, but Key Quay or whatever, however you want to pronounce it, has the
And
ability.
Harbor also has
Harbor
webhooks. Yeah.
has the ability to send a webhook. So technically, yeah, like if you have a platform for images, um, for OCI too, like it'll technically work. Yeah.
Yep. Um, and then let's move to people like we have 12 people here. If you want to comment or ask questions, feel free to
Yeah.
put them in the chat or just raise your hand. I think there's a hand thing that people can click. Uh, yeah, raise your hand. There's a button in the more thing. And then like this chapter talks about now integrating like something is built in the image, right? It'll be something like a CI product will be Jenkins, GitHub Actions, um, but two projects that have CI inside the cluster that I'm aware that is from the open source landscape is Tekton, which is part of the Continuous Deployment Foundation, right? And
It's
then we have
CD
Argo
Foundation. Yeah.
Workflows that is part of the CNCF, which is the Argo project.
Yeah.
And but both are open source, Apache 2 license. But these are like based on CRDs. Like if you want to run CI in Kubernetes, you can use these two. Or oh, I forgot, you can also use GitHub. There's something called ACR, I think it is to run GitHub Actions in pods in Kubernetes. There's a controller that
Oh,
actually
that's
will
cool.
spin up a,
Yeah.
a container and has the GitHub runtime, and your GitHub Actions were running in containers. I was like dating myself to back to when Tekton came out.
Yeah.
It was only
Yeah.
workflows and Tekton, but then yeah, people have installed this Helm package that connects to your GitHub Actions, and then the GitHub Actions instead of like running on the GitHub infrastructure, we're running your Kubernetes cluster like EKS or Kind or OpenShift or whatever you're using. Um, but yeah, Tekton, you this chapter, I think Andy wrote it and you review it. Like if you can go,
Yeah.
you can talk, you can have like a book on Tekton, right? There's so much things
You can have a
to
whole book
explain
on
this thing.
Tekton.
So
Yeah.
you went light of like, hey, you install it, you get these components, and then these are the like the CRDs, a
Yeah.
task run, pipeline,
Run
pipeline run. Do
pipeline.
you want
Pipeline.
to go over like the four things or
Yeah,
um,
yeah. A task is basically you can think about it as like a step, right? Like a series, a step, right? Like git clone would be like a task, right? Um, or sorry, a task is a series of steps, right? So like git clone's a step, you know, git commit and git push, right? Like you have three steps, and that those together are known as a task, right? So it's kind of like a think of it as like
and sequential? They were running
yeah,
sequential,
yeah,
right?
sequential, right? A
And one
task
pod.
run, yeah,
I think it's one
yeah, yeah,
pod.
yeah, and it's one
Yeah,
pod,
one
yeah,
pod. Yeah.
one pod. And in a task run is basically kind of like an implementation of that task, right? So it's kind of like templatized, right? Like you have like a template of kind of like, you know, git clone this repo, git commit this repo, git push whatever repo you give it, right? And task run is an implementation of that, right? Like
Yeah, it's
so
an
git clone an
instantiation of
instance,
like
yeah,
run. I think it's the same thing as Argo workflow. I can match it to
yeah,
Argo workflows. I've been doing more
yeah,
work on
yeah.
Argo workflows. Like you create a workflow or a workflow template, and then the workflow is the one that would like run. Like it could be called workflow run.
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
needs to run it because in Kubernetes everything is like static and declarative. So how do you like trigger something other than a job, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And
And then
so
pipeline is the composition.
of a pipeline is basically a composition of many tasks, right? Because like basically you're creating a pipeline, right? Like, you do the task. There's like basically a task is a collection of steps. Pipeline is a collection of tasks, right? It's kind of like you think of those Russian dolls, right? Like if they all
Yeah.
nest together, and then a pipeline again is like an association of whatever pipeline you have.
And like we were talking before, was like a task is a pod that has I guess all of them are sidecar containers and they run in
Yeah.
order. So it guarantees an order of these execution steps happening. The pipeline, then you can put tasks together, but you can run a few in parallel. Right. That's where you're going to run. Like I'm going to run this task and this task, or notify two things. Pipeline that can run tasks in order that other task, and it will figure out the diag. Right. It will create a diag,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if two things can run in parallel, it will try to run optimize, right, and run in parallel, so those two pods will run at the same time. Um, and then the pipeline run is the entry point, right? Like this is where if I think you mentioned it down here, like there's a separate um, these are the examples. This is how you install it, like a git clone task. These are the definitions, or like they could be called templates. Like in Argo Workflows, you're working with Argo Workflows. So you
Yeah.
apply those, and then they take parameters like when you want to run something, like what is the task reference or run after. Yeah, this is kind of like this runs after this one. So that's why you create the dependency of like the tasks. Um, and you can pass parameters. So you inside there's a syntax. I think at the bottom you see a syntax
Mhm.
here, like a step template, and then you have your step that is like sync the app. So in these terms, what you're describing here is if you want to from CI, right? You want to trigger Argo CD. I guess you can do it in two ways, right? You can like
Yeah.
do a curl, like do an HTTP request and simulate a Git webhook or something like that.
Yeah.
Or I usually prefer Argo CD app sync. What do you think?
Yeah. Argo City App Sync. It's probably the preferred method. You can also do kubectl. There's like a way to patch the application YAML to tell it
Tell
to
it like
sync.
refresh.
Yeah, tell it to refresh and sync. And then there's a specific way because there's like a lot of data that comes in. People just think that you annotate it and it'll sync, and it will do that. But like there's like a specific way where you can add metadata.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah, but Argo CD. Argo City App Sync is probably like the easiest way, right? You don't have to worry
Abstraction
about
for that process of
yeah,
at the end of the day, it's doing the same thing. It's like finding the Argo app and annotating it with the metadata. So then the
yeah,
controller will wake up and see like, hey, somebody modified the Argo app. What do I need to do with it? And it will do the sync. Um, I see that you have a Argo CD app wait. I never used that. I always use app sync, and app sync is kind of like block process. No? Or am I incorrect?
no, yeah. You have to put in with the weight.
Interesting. Or there's a flag that is that way. I swear I use app
There,
sync
there, there might
in
there might be
production,
there might be a flag, but usually
and it
you
waits
app
until
sync.
everything
Yeah,
is or maybe is that it waits until everything sync, but it's not healthy yet,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then the
Yeah, like
second one
it'll
is
literally.
the health flag.
Yeah,
So yeah, this is will be a something that if you're building your right by hand, you will use something like this, right? Like promote something and notify. And I've created my own cargo. Like I want to say cargo because cargo is a kind of a tool, right, that does promotion. But before cargo, I guess you and me and others have created a promotion based pipelines, right, with GitHub Actions, Jenkins, and Tekton. I have a lot of demos out there.
yeah.
um, so you apply this,
Mhm.
and then basically is when something change. I think you talk about it here.
Yeah.
when you add the permission. So this is okay. So this goes to the permission. So before going there, so the process is maybe you used to have Argo is the one doing the sync, right? So instead of like
Yeah.
doing a hey git change, go ahead and apply this YAML. Maybe you can have Tekton uh, build the image, modify sync, but also talk to Argo, right? To do the promotion, but to talk to Argo, you need permissions, and this is the recommendation
Yeah.
you give, which I think is a good one. Like it uses a token. I don't know where is this thing at the top. If you see here is Argo CD auth token is coming from a secret, right? And you logging in with Argo CD server, Argo CD username, Argo CD
Yeah.
password. This is sensitive information, and then you're one of the Argo CD users at that point from Tekton. But you
Yeah.
suggest, or
Yeah.
Andy suggests to use a role. Why would I use a
Yeah.
role? What would people think about using a role?
Yeah, essentially what you want to do is you want to create like a what do you call robot account, right? Basically, you want in the end you don't want to be using like your account or anyone else's. Like you want to be able to use create a role that basically says just allow this whoever uses this token or this user in this case to just do a sync, right? Like you just want to be able to do a sync and that's it. Um, and if you're plugging in like the Argo CD CLI in CI/CD, or even if you're just doing a curl at that point, but I think specifically if you're using the Argo CD CLI in your CI process to create a role for it, and this is kind of like the fast and easy way to do it.
And what would be a common anti-pattern that you see? Are people use the admin account to do in CI?
Yeah, so I like or like they would put like they would create it like a regular user, right? Like they would create
A user that can delete apps that
yeah, like a delete apps or like they have
and
like more control over the app. And really what you wanted to do is just sync, right? Like you just kind of want it to do an on-demand sync and you don't want it to do much else
so
other
this
than
is
that.
where the Argo project comes benefit, right? Of setting the Argo CD RBAC, right? This is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
Kubernetes RBAC, but this is Argo CD RBAC that if this, I call it, usually we call it like service account, right? Or service role. Um, the only thing that it needs to do is deploy, then should only have access to get and sync, right? If somebody gets a hold of the Tekton system, right? The worst that they can do is like get and sync, but would not be able to modify the image to a road image, right? Or a hacker's
Yeah.
image,
Yeah.
and then nobody knows that somebody changed something. So this is a good guidance. And it also the Argo CD has a quick way, and some people struggle with this to create it manually. Like I just suggest people use the Argo CD like create token. And
Hmm.
I think in the previous chapters we talk about that using a token versus username and password. And we show this example of getting a token, and then it's a matter of giving it to Tekton, and then now is I think in the repo you have Git, right?
Yep. Yep.
That you configure the triggering the pipelines. So this is like if you, at this point you're in the book, you're like testing it manually, right? You're creating a pipeline run, making sure that it syncs. You see Argo CD running, so you kind of like walk before you run. But in this
Hmm.
in this thing of like triggering Tekton pipelines, it's a different project. It's not part. It doesn't get installed by default, so you have to install
Yeah.
the CRDs, the triggers, and interceptors. So
Yeah.
interceptors is the ones that are going to receive that webhook, right, for
Yeah.
GitHub.
Webhook. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the release is, I think that's a diagram here that it was added.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I think this is the diagram. Doesn't have the trigger. I thought it was going to have the trigger, but this is the pipeline one. Um, maybe, yeah, maybe this figure should have gone before, right? And maybe a different figure for triggers. But I'm familiar with event listeners, trigger, and
Yeah.
interceptors. Basically, this what it helps you is to stand up a deployment with a service that then starts like a load balancer or something that can start receiving that
Yeah.
that thing. So it automates that process of you can do it by hand, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
automates the process of like standing up a deployment with a container image from the Tekton project that knows how to handle that webhook or Git or whatever to parse it out and then get the information into parameters that then you can pass it to the task of saying and
Oh,
run the pipeline, and the task could be like
yeah.
build the image, right? Usually that's what you're going to do,
Yeah, it's
build
going
the
to build an
image.
image or do, like if you make or run a linter, right? Like if
Yeah,
you're doing GitOps, right? Like you run a linter or whatever. The idea here is like what in this part of the chapter is like you're basically starting um you have a Git repo, and then you have like Tekton doing the CI, and then at the very end, Argo CD is doing the CD, right? So like you're gonna do some sort of Git commit that will go through Tekton, right? Or like you can conceptualize it like GitHub Actions or whatever, blah blah blah, right? But you have a CI process in the middle, and at the very end, Argo CD does the sync. So you were talking about earlier about like controlling rollouts and controlling syncs, right? Like this is kind of like a way to do that, right? Like you have this middle kind of Tekton process that allows you to do that.
yeah, and Tekton is a task runner. Like it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
CI/CD, right? The same way Argo Workflows is very popular in analytics, and
Yeah.
batch,
Yep.
right? Like I would say the majority of people that know about Argo workflows or use Argo workflows are analytics people, not
Yeah. Yeah.
CI/CD. CI/CD is like one of the small use cases because there's so much products by vendors, right? Or you get it from your cloud provider. And in AWS, we have code build, code pipeline, we have GitHub Actions. Usually the ones the thing that the provider that gives you Git has GitLab, right? GitLab has pipelines. So that CI/CD process is not like comes with it out of the box. It already have templates to do Docker linting, Docker build images, and then
Yeah.
just hook in there the Argo CD CLI step, right, to sync. But this is a good example of like the trigger template, right? That you will take that information, and then when the template gets executed, this is the repo URL where you can also extract it from the payload. The revision of like what is the branch or git commit that you're going to extract, what is the manifest directory. So these are the information that you need maybe when you are going to like build the image, or you're going to tell Argo CD to sync a path, right? Like if you have a mono
Yeah.
repo, you don't want to Argo sync the whole thing, right? Because it's going to try to call the Argos repo server and git ls remote, and then that takes forever. You get rate limited. So the pathing the path is an optimization. That's why you pass the path here, and that will map to the Argo app that it needs to be synced. And the binding is just like this is like Tekton specific things of like binding that template to the payload when it comes in and then executing it. Um, and then this one is just applying those all those like yeah, you went over explaining the YAML files, and then like all this is in the Git repo. So if you're new to these sessions, the Argo CD up and running book comes with a companion GitHub repo. So all the examples that Christian and Andy put in the book, you can run them in kind, right? Everything runs in
Yep.
kind, a kind cluster, which is a very small cluster you can run on your laptop and go through it, and then extrapolate that aspect to a real production system from any Argo CD vendor or open source, and it would go with that. Um, so this one, sync policy, Argo CD application to remove the automated. What is this part does? I don't remember. Sync policy and the target
Oh yeah.
revision properties.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't because we
Oh
don't
yeah.
need it anymore.
You
That
don't need it
information will
anymore.
be
Yeah.
passed. That information will get passed through
Get
the
passed
app
through the
sync.
Yep.
Interesting. And then automated. Yeah, this is the piece that I tell a lot of people. For some reason, I don't know, Eric, and maybe people in the chat. Some people have told me that they don't use GitOps in production because they don't want things to be deployed automatically. And I'm always like trying to internalize that
Yeah.
that comment, and I say, do you realize that the biggest companies in the world using Argo or GitOps like Intuit,
Yeah.
they don't have the setting to be automated into the production system. there's a promotion. It's a promotion step. Either
Yep.
Intuit
Yeah, it
uses
happens. Yeah.
Jenkins, right? I think they're trying to move to another system, but they use Jenkins for many years. I know customers that use GitHub Actions. I know customers use Argo Workflows.
Yep.
I know customers that do it manually. So and now with Acuity having Cargo, right?
Yeah.
You have a process, a change management process that when you want to deploy the application, it's just you're instead of doing a kubectl apply, you're
Yeah.
doing a git sync, and then you get that health, right? Heal, um, that if somebody changes something by mistake, kubectl SRE goes in and starts mucking
Yeah.
around, and they're working on the wrong cluster because they think it's the dev cluster, and they
Yeah.
change
Yeah.
something, right, and leave, at night. Argo can say, well, somebody changed this, it should not be that, and it will revert it back to the last desired promotion step that you did last week, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a lot of benefit, like not the benefit of Git to deploy. It's like the benefit of like this is the desired state. No one should
Yeah.
change this, right? Because this is the desired state. If you don't have Argo CD, somebody come in, change the config map by mistake, thinking that they're working in production, they're working in the staging, they change production. That change stays there for the whole week, and nobody knows.
Yeah, yeah, and I always, and I'm with you there because like what I think or what when the conversations I have is like when they say, well, I don't want it to be automatically pushed into production. I'm like, well, who's pushing it into production? Well, like Git. I'm like, well, then why did you allow that? Like what's wrong? So for me, it's like, well, I turn off automated sync. I'm like, then my immediate question is, what's wrong with your Git release process that you have to do that? Because it's not it's like it's kind of like you have to take the mentality of the valve, right? Like so instead of your valve being like here, right, like in your command line on your release, whatever, it's like over here in your Git repo. You just have to push the valve, right? Your on and off switches over here, right? Which is why very like get like proper Git processes are very important, because that's your interface, right? That's your control into. So like
It's like a
yeah, like
projection of etcd outside, right? This is
yeah,
a
yeah,
projection. Your
exactly,
Git becomes a
exactly,
database that you touch, right? So you
yeah.
have to have control process of like who's touching
It's,
Git.
it's like, well,
Um,
yeah, I don't want my developers to push, to merge something into production. I'm like, well, then why are you allowing that, right? Like for me, I turn it right back into the admin. Like, why are you allowing, like, what, you need to change your process, right? You need to change, like even if it's you have a separate Git repo, even if you have a separate, like, even if their request has to go through like a ServiceNow ticket, and then you have some automation that does a PR or whatever. It's it's the process, right? It's not necessarily like turning off automated, like for me, the benefit, there's so much benefit to have sync automation turned on, that I would like, for me to
that's the
go back to
ideal,
those
right? That's
customers.
the
Yeah, that's
ideal
the ideal. Yeah,
situation for.
yeah.
I think that's where I get a little bit empathic and start asking, and I find two good reasons, right? And it's like meeting people where they are, like in their process. One is one that you mentioned was good one is Jira ticket, and I used to do that when I was an SRE. I had to go into an automated system and ask
Mhm.
the we automated with a bot and Slack. Like I was going to do a change request in production. I submitted a this form through Slack and the link to my Jenkins test results that were green, and then I got back a ticket number. And then with that ticket number, then I was able to go into Jenkins to deploy. And the second one is sync windows. Like some companies, they need to deploy on this date, on this week, or maybe Tuesday, always Tuesday. So that's also Argo CD has sync windows, right? That you can put in the Argo project. You can say during this time period, do not allow any syncs. And Argo CD will respect that and only sync on this thing. So like you said, if somebody wants to go full automated and they have that constraint about like this only this time window we are allowed to deploy, that's why we need a human to do it at
Yeah,
that time. You don't need a human. You can use an Argo CD sync window, put when it actually you're going to allow to sync, and Argo CD would just, if you push something into Git and there's a sync window, Argo CD will not sync, right? It will wait, it will try again, will try until there's that sync window falls off of disallowment, and then Argo CD will sync, which is in the date, the desired date. Is that correct? That's something be good to suggest, folks.
The sync windows is definitely something that is being used. I think even at Intuit they use it, right? Like it's like, yeah, they click sync, but like actually nothing happens because you're outside the window, right? Like I want a release to happen only at night, right? And so then you have like those bots happening at night, in terms of like syncing, right? What's really cool about the sync window is that auto heal still works, right? And so like if someone makes an out of band change, right, because that's an event, that's an etcd, like you said, an etcd trigger event, right? Like if they like scale a deployment to like 3 replicas instead of like it being 2, Argo CD will still like revert it back. So you kind of get that, but then you're also protecting your release, right? Like you say, okay, I have a sync window, meaning that like I'm only allowing, after midnight on Sundays for things to sync from the Git repo. That's really cool because then at that point you can just do merge, 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 and then at whatever time the sync is actually eventually gonna happen, after off hours or whatever, right? So you kind of get like the best of both worlds there.
Okay, so with that, if you want to learn more, you can stop by the Argo booth.
Yeah.
If not, then come next week. We're going to be talking about the next chapter, and get the book. Like if you haven't not read the book and you just joined today, we discussed the other ones. If you want to listen to the discussions, we put them in YouTube. And join us next week. Hopefully, Andy will be with us. Christian, are you going to make it next week?
Let me see here. Let me look at my calendar.
If not,
Yeah. Yep. I
okay.
should be here next week. Yeah.
Cool. So thank you, folks, for joining today, and
Yep.
we'll see you next week. Thank you, Christian, again for your time on like
Yeah.
writing the book and also the stories, which is very
Yeah. No, it's
useful.
always great. Yeah. No, we'll definitely have more stories